Hello and welcome to this edition of Focus, a program produced by the Department of Disaster Management. I am the DDM's Information and Education Manager, Philomena Robertson. Thank you for joining us. Oftentimes, when we think about disaster management, we think about our response to disasters. However, the actions we take in preparation for disasters can often mitigate the extent or severity of their impact. The disaster management cycle is actually comprised of 4 phases. They are mitigation, and that entails the activities that help to reduce the effects of disasters, including building codes and zoning, hazard prediction and modeling, risk assessment and mapping, and public awareness and education. In the preparedness phase, these include the activities that are taken prior to a disaster, such as preparedness plans, emergency exercises and training, and warning systems. In the response phase, the activities occur during a disaster, including emergency operations and search and rescue. And in the recovery phase, that's the activities that are undertaken following a disaster, such as temporary housing, emergency communication, and dispatching resources. Mitigation is the theme of our discussion today. It is particularly important because it is about taking action now to prevent the loss of life and property in the event of a disaster. The money invested in activities in this phase can help you to save thousands of dollars later. In fact, according to a recent study by the Multi-Hazard Mitigation Council in the United States, every dollar spent on mitigation saves society an average of $4. Mitigation takes on added significance in the British Virgin Islands because of the hilly terrain that is prevalent. The terrain is a factor that must be critically considered when planning and undertaking developments. My guests today are Christopher Williams, the Technical Planning Officer at the DDM, and Mr. Dylan Penn, the newly appointed Deputy Chief Physical Planner in the Town and Country Planning Department. The DDM continues to promote a collaborative approach in the pursuit of comprehensive disaster management, and the TCP is one of the many stakeholders that we partner with as part of the process. Though they are pursued from different angles, our goal is basically the same: to ensure that developments taking place within the BVI are compliant with existing legislation and that developers seek from the onset to mitigate the potential impact of hazards. I'll start with Mr. Williams, who works in the Mitigation and Planning Department of the DDM. Now, in addition to hazard prediction, modeling, and mapping, the DDM also undertakes hazard vulnerability assessments, or HVAs, as we'll refer to them for the duration of this program. This is actually one of the first things that you should consider when planning to develop your property. Mr. Williams, can you explain what is hazard vulnerability assessment?
Well, the hazard vulnerability assessment is a site-by-site analysis that's conducted using the very same elements that you just mentioned, the modeling and hazard data that we have for the BVI. And from this assessment, we're able to identify and quantify the hazards that your site is vulnerable to. And we can also recommend mitigation measures which can mitigate the impact of these hazards on your development.
Now, why is the HVA necessary?
The HVA is necessary because it provides your designers, as in your architect or engineer, with useful information which would enhance your development and reduce the level of risk involved in undertaking that development.
Is the HVA mandatory or is it optional for developers?
Well, right now, I would have to say a bit of both. The HVA can be undertaken voluntarily by coming in and applying at the Department of Disaster Management. However, in the case that an application is submitted to the Town and Country Planning Department, at times they may require that an HVA is completed, and the results of that HVA would inform the decision made by the planning authority.
Okay. Now, why does the DDM recommend HVAs and what are the benefits?
Well, The DDM recommends HVAs because we try to encourage comprehensive disaster management, and the HVA would fall into hazard mitigation. And so we want to reduce the level of risk and the level of impact of hazards on persons' properties, lives, and livelihoods. The benefit of the HVA is that it allows us to identify, or allows landowners to identify the hazards that their property may be vulnerable to, and provides that person with advice and guidelines as to how this can be reduced.
Okay, so you mentioned that the HVA is part of the mitigation process, so that's exactly where it fits into the whole disaster management cycle. Can you elaborate a little more for us on how it fits with mitigation?
Okay, well, since the hazard vulnerability assessment would be undertaken prior to development in the planning phase of a project, it allows basic risks to be identified. For example, if a property is very steep and vulnerable to landslides, then we can either recommend, in some cases, depending on the probability, that you either do not develop that property, or that additional research may be needed, for example, geotechnical studies, or that a retaining structure may be required to mitigate against that risk of landslides. So the mitigation, so HVA fits into mitigation because it prevents or reduces the impact of hazards. And as you know, in the BVI, many of our hazards are not preventable, and we can only mitigate the impact that it has on us.
Of course. Can you walk us now through the process? How is the HVA conducted? What does it really entail?
Okay. The HVA generally occurs in two stages. One part of the HVA would be undertaken at a desk using software, geographical information systems, and looking at overlaying maps and hazard data on a particular site, and basically conducting preliminary analysis from the desk. After we've completed that desk research on your site, we go out to the site and do an actual field assessment. And from that field assessment, we are able to validate what is found in the hazard data and make adjustments in terms of our recommendations.
Okay. And how does one apply for an HVA?
Well, right now, you have two options. One can come into the Department of Disaster Management at McNamara and complete an application form and submit it. An alternative to that would be calling the department to inquire about the HVA, and if one calls the department, we can email an electronic application form to you, and you can submit it to us electronically. However, you would still have to come to the office to make the payment for the HVA. What
is the fee for the HVA?
Well, HVA is done at a nominal fee, $75 for residential application, residential development, and $250 for a commercial development.
Okay. And once I've submitted the application, what's the turnaround time? When can I expect to have the results of the assessment?
We generally try to get these HVAs completed within a 2-week period. However, sometimes we may experience delays if the site is very remote on another island, and we may have difficulty planning the scheduling the transportation to the site. But apart from that, it would be generally completed in a 2-week time period.
Okay. And what would you say are the potential cost savings for landowners and developers? You mentioned there being a nominal fee, $75 and $250. What cost savings can people realize down the road if they undertake the HVA as recommended by the DDM?
Well, the cost savings are very difficult to quantify, but they can be quite extensive, because by mitigating hazards, we all know that the impact of hazards may lead to reduction of productivity or loss of livelihoods due to damage to commercial establishments, etc. It may lead to damage to your home, damage or loss of an entire building or household, and it can lead to injury and can lead to loss of life. So there really isn't a price that can be placed on hazard mitigation. Sometimes by conducting that HVA and having a properly planned and designed development may actually be saving a life.
Okay. Have you encountered in your work at the Department of Disaster Management, and if so, can you share any scenarios where an HVA may not have been conducted for a property and then the landowner, developer encountered problems later on? Have you encountered any such scenarios?
Well, actually, this is quite common. The reason for that is that the HVA process was only begun about 5 years ago. And you would know that development has been taking place in the Virgin Islands for decades. So many of the developments that have been completed in the Virgin Islands have been done without the benefit of an HVA. So after many storms and impacts such as after Otto, we would have seen some buildings which were damaged by landslides. And looking at the hazard data that we've recently acquired within the past few years, we would see that if that person had had the benefit of that data, they may not have built in that manner or in that location.
Okay. Mr. Penn, I want to bring you in on the discussion here. Enlighten us a bit, first of all, about the Town and Country Department and your overall role in the development process.
Sure. The Town and Country Planning Department is charged with ensuring orderly and sustainable development, physical development of the territory. And this is done primarily through two main routes. The development planning, which is the more proactive approach, I like to say, doing development plans or preparing development plans for the territory or various parts of the territory. And also development control, which looks more at receiving the applications for development from potential developers and processing them, reviewing them, and ensuring that they are compliant with our laws. The primary law which guides us is the Physical Planning Act of 2004.
Okay. And I know that as part of your work, you encourage persons to come in for pre-development discussions. That's
Yes.
even before they consider what to do with their property.
Yeah.
Have persons been taking advantage of this opportunity? And what do you really discuss when you meet with them?
Well, we like to put out there at every opportunity that we get that it's prudent to communicate with the department as early as possible, just your general ideas for development. So in that vein, we've been encouraging potential developers, agents, representative companies who intend to develop the larger developments to come in and just share with us your ideas or the concepts of your development. We've seen an increase as of late of people just coming in and clarifying the rules and the regulations for development to really ensure that they save time and money when it comes to the time of submission for the full development. We've noticed that people have been reluctant to come in early on when we first started encouraging people to come in, but certainly we've seen an improvement.
Okay, and that augurs well for the fact that you encourage people to engage in constant communication with you. So it's not just that initial conversation, but to maintain communication throughout the process so that you can iron out whatever issues.
Definitely. It's about establishing relationships, and once you establish that relationship early on and remain in constant communication, then we know exactly the phases of your development as they progress, and we are better able to advise you and guide you as it relates to the aspects that we will be certainly looking at in terms of approval and processing.
Okay. So I want you to now walk me through the development process. I've acquired some property. I've done the mitigation aspect of it. I've requested the HVA from the DDM. What's my next step?
Well, firstly, just let me point out that, as Christopher earlier said, that the HVA can be requested voluntarily before anything, which is the example that you've brought up. And it also can be requested by the planning authority, at which point that's after the development has been submitted. But you've acquired your property, you've done the HVA, you've come into us for the pre-development discussion. So at this point, we're hoping that we're on the same page as it relates to the concept of your development. You have two options after that. You can submit for approval in principle. So if you still have questions or you're still unsure whether you really want to invest the resources into the full plans for your development, and you're unsure whether we'll approve the whole development, submit the conceptual development for approval in principle. That will be examined. And the good thing is that the fee for the approval in principle will be subtracted from the full approval when you come time to make that application. So the approval in principle would then, tell you whether it's okay to go ahead with your development. It will be viewed favorably by the planning authority, not approved, but just viewed favorably, and ensure it's in compliance. Or you could apply for full approval for the development. And that development, once you apply for full approval, then it goes through the process whereby it's reviewed by the pre-planning authority, and then if it passes the pre-planning authority, which is a board consisting of various government agencies, it goes to the planning authority for final approval.
Okay. And there's an established process and, of course, regulations that govern developments in the BVI. But it is my understanding that you're faced with a significant level of non-compliance. Can you provide us with some insight as to some of the issues that you face regarding compliance?
Well, there are several issues that we face regarding compliance. There's the case of developments that have been approved. I'll start first with those. They have been approved. They've received the approval letter with certain conditions, but some of the developments wouldn't comply with all of the conditions that are listed in the approval letter. Just to give you a specific example, one of the conditions state to use erosion control methods wherever feasible. As you mentioned earlier, the BVI is a very hilly terrain where if you cut land, you'll realize that the effects of runoff will not only affect your land, but land further down the hill and also eventually the coastline. So that's one of the basic conditions in approval. But if you go around the territory today, you'll hardly see a development with, for example, silk curtains in to control erosion. Another one of the conditions is landscaping. So you'll landscaping immediately after clearing the land. That's another thing that it is very much lacking. So that's the developments that are approved. And another issue is the illegal developments which take place without any sort of planning permission. And that presents much of the same type of problems, but also other problems including encroachment and also issues between residents, which leads to things that the Town and Country Planning Department has no control over.
Okay. Mr. Williams, I want to bring you back into the conversation here. Now, Mr. Penn explained about the problems that they face. I want you to underscore for the residents of the BVI the increased risk that they expose themselves to when they fail to comply with the regulations that are set out for developments. And that's from a disaster management perspective.
Well, from a risk perspective, there are a number of things to be considered. Undertaking development without approval basically disconnects you from the support system that exists within the BVI government, in which there is a team of experts who have some knowledge that can inform and improve how your development is undertaken. From a town planning perspective, from public works, and from the disaster management department, we can provide you with a lot of information as to the risks involved with your development, advice as to how best to undertake your development, and this can lead to securing your property and significant cost savings in the long run. The other thing is that undertaking illegal development automatically excludes you from coverage by insurance, etc., in case of damage to your structure as a result of a disaster event.
And I think it's important that persons realize that they're not doing the DDM a favor, they're not doing TCP a favor, they're not doing the Planning Authority a favor. They are protecting themselves, their lives, their families' lives, and their own personal investment.
Yeah, yes. it's definitely, and it's a certain perception in the BVI that, well, probably everywhere that people own property, that it's my property, so I could do as I may with my property. And it's important to know that departments such as DDM and town planning, we're not here to hinder development, but rather we're here to facilitate orderly and sustainable development, provided that, we'll give you the advice, we'll give you the expertise, just as long as you cooperate with us.
Right, and I think persons also have to consider the potential impact of their non-compliance on others, because yes, it's my property, and I may think that I can do what I want to, but in doing so, if we were to have hazard impact and something happens, like a retaining wall collapses, an illegally constructed retaining wall, then you may impact others in the process, and that complicates, further compounds the matter.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now, I know that the TCP undertakes development monitoring as part of your process. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, the development monitoring officially, has really recently started up. Really, it used to be up to the field officers or the officers who review the actual development applications as they come in. At certain points after the approval has been granted, one of the conditions of the approval was to give the department a call when you're getting ready to cut the land and at various stages in the development. That has largely not been followed, but there have been times when those officers would go out. But the development monitoring is something that has recently started. We have a small unit, about 2 or 3 people, that go out at various stages of construction and just check the status of construction. Are they adhering to the original plans? Is there any change? Have they been submitted to the Town and Country Planning Department? Is anything looking to be detrimental to the environment? And those sort of stuff. So that unit then creates reports that are given to the planning authority. So it gives us a better grip on what really is going on in the territory in terms of development.
Okay. And when you discover non-compliant developments, what are the steps taken?
According to the Section 39 of the Physical Planning Act, it speaks to the issuance of compliance notices for developments which are found to be in non-compliance with the laws. The compliance notice basically asks that you either do one of several things, either submit the plans for the development if it's in non-compliance, if it's illegal, or make certain changes that would bring it into compliance, or any number of things that the chief planner sees fit. If the developer or developers fail to comply within a certain number of time, I think it's 28 days according to the compliance notice, then a stop order is issued. Basically, it's self-explanatory. You stop the development and bring it into compliance as soon as possible, or you face prosecution, which includes a fine. So the fine varies for the type of developments, but certainly that is the end result.
Okay. And are these measures sufficient to encourage persons to comply? Are you still encountering difficulty?
There is a bit of difficulty, and we're actually currently undertaking the preparation of the regulations, the planning regulations, to supplement the Physical Planning Act. And these regulations will spell out exactly the enforcement action that will be taken. And we've been looking at making changes to the enforcement action to encourage developers to come into compliance at a quicker rate and take it a bit more seriously, because currently the problem with the compliance notices is that going through the court process in order to determine the fine, it's very, very lengthy. So the amount of time between the issuance of the compliance notice and the end result, you'll find that some buildings probably have already been built by the time that happens. So we're looking at making it more efficient with these new regulations, and they will be rolled out to the public in due course.
Okay. So in the event that the building has been completed before the legal process is exhausted, what's the recourse for
There
TCP?
is really the most extreme circumstance is actually for buildings to be broken down if found in non-compliance. To my recollection, there has only been one such case that happened in the Virgin Islands, and we really don't want to have to resort to that course, but really that is the most extreme circumstance.
Okay. And how widespread really is the issue of illegal development? I know you mentioned it as one of the problems you face. I mean, a lot of people undertaking illegal developments?
Yeah, you don't want to focus always on the negative, because there are some people, and there are quite a lot of people who comply, but the problem of illegal development is very widespread on not just Tortola, but really all the islands in the territory. And you find them to be for a host of reasons. Either people are ignorant of the laws and regulations, or some people just blatantly choose to ignore. But it is very widespread. It's a problem that we're working hard to tackle, and with the issuance of the regulations, we hope that it goes a long way and really ensuring compliance with the laws.
Okay. Is there anything that you'd like to add? We're coming to the end of the program. Is there anything that you'd like to say in wrap up?
Well, from our perspective, the hazard vulnerability assessment is a process that evolves as we move along, and we try to improve the process through improved data, etc. Recently, in 2012, we were able to obtain tsunami inundation data, and we've been able to incorporate that into our recommendations. The things that we're looking to incorporate further into the hazard vulnerability assessment are considerations for climate change scenarios and how this will affect hazard vulnerability in the Virgin Islands. Because as we know, with climate change, we expect an increased frequency of extreme events, intense precipitation events, which trigger landslides and rapid flash floods, etc. So this may adjust some of the recommendations that we may make for certain areas of the Virgin Islands. And sea level rise, global sea level rise is also a potential impact on the coastal developments in the Virgin Islands, and we also need to account for that. And the other thing that we want to incorporate is consideration of technological hazards, because we focused a lot in the past on only natural hazards, but as we have increased development, you have increased technological hazards associated with these developments, and we would also like to incorporate this into our hazard assessment.
Okay. Mr. Penn, any final words from you?
Well, just to speak really about the partnership and the communication between DDM and town planning, the more information at an early stage is always better for us in terms of accurate decision making. And the data that's collected in the hazard vulnerability assessment feeds readily into our own geographic information system, which is mainly housed in town and country planning as it relates to the different layers of data available. Layers, for example, looking at landslide-prone areas, layers looking at soil types, and Chris has just spoke about the data that is being considered to be added to the whole process. So all of this information will ensure that the Town and Country Planning Department and the Planning Authority, when it gets to that level, are equipped with the information to make the best decision possible regarding developments, the types of development that should take place, and the level of development that should take place. So it bodes well that we're pushing forward in gathering that information. It bodes well for us, and it bodes well for the territory as a whole.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. And let us continue to work together, because after all, we're working towards a single objective, yes, to ensure that developments are safe and compliant.
Yes.
Now, that brings us to the end of this edition of Focus. Remember, mitigation is an important part of the disaster management process. It helps you to understand, to analyze, and to reduce the potential impact of hazards. I encourage you to request your hazard vulnerability assessments, or HVAs. They are not mandatory, but for a small fee, you can be made aware of the potential hazard risk on your property and plan your developments accordingly. Also, once you embark on development, I encourage you to maintain a compliance with the processes and the regulations established by the Town and Country Planning Department and the Planning Authority. Ignorance of the law or the processes involved is not an excuse. Take the necessary action today to safeguard your life and your investment, and to build resiliency in the BVI. I am Information and Education Manager at the DDM, Philomena Robertson. Thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in again next time.